We did no wrong here, and we don't understand how we're getting so much hate behind it. We all cared and loved Nolan, and nobody wanted to see Nolan die. Nobody wanted to see so short.
There is a young man who spent part of that 4th of July afternoon standing right next to Nolan Wells, who is now the only person present on Horn Island that day willing to speak on the record under his own name, and who says no investigator has ever once reached out to him. That's where we're starting today, because this update has moved past the timeline we already know and into two threads that change the shape of this case. A possible adult presence on that boat, and a witness who was actually there. Quick reminder of where things stand. Nolan Wells was 18, last confirmed seen on Horn Island at 3 o'clock that afternoon, gone from the boat by 4:30. His parents, Christine and Elmore, alongside attorney Ben Crump, have said from the beginning they do not accept that their son simply chose to stay behind. Elmore has raised his son on one rule for 18 years. If you leave with the group, you come back with the group. Now let's get into what's actually new. The family didn't bring in just anyone for the independent autopsy. They turned to Dr. Roger Mitchell, the chief medical examiner for Washington, D.C., someone who has reportedly conducted more than 1,400 autopsies and has weighed in on some of the country's most high-profile death investigations. Colin Kaepernick facilitated flying Nolan's body from Mississippi to the nation's capital for that exam. Let me be very clear about why that specific choice matters. Independent autopsies in high-attention cases don't always come from examiners with this level of standing. Families have sometimes turned to more overtly advocacy-oriented pathologists, and results have occasionally been criticized afterward as reaching a predetermined conclusion. A sitting chief medical examiner with well over 1,000 autopsies behind him is a deliberate choice, one that should make it harder for either side of this case to dismiss his findings as biased, whatever those findings turn out to say. And those findings still haven't come. Crump said over the weekend they're expected very soon. That phrase has already outlasted more than one earlier prediction in this case. Earlier reporting suggested results within a day or two of the body arriving. A press conference was expected to include an announcement. It didn't. Now the timeline has shifted again to a general very soon. That pattern, on its own, doesn't mean anything is wrong with the exam itself. Thorough forensic work in a heavily scrutinized case often takes longer than early expectations suggest. But it does mean the independent process hasn't moved any faster than the state's. Here's a detail that, if accurate, would change the shape of this entire case. According to Elmore, it wasn't just Nolan and 3 teenage friends on that boat. He says there was also an adult present, a parent of one of the boys. Let me stop right there, because I want to be careful with this one. This specific claim has not been independently confirmed by investigators, and it isn't entirely clear how Elmore came to this understanding. But if it's accurate, it shifts the entire conversation. Up until now, the public discussion has largely treated this as a story about teenagers making the kinds of calls teenagers make without adult supervision. An adult on that boat would carry a different kind of responsibility, the kind most people expect to include making sure every young person on that trip actually made it home. That's exactly why this claim needs real scrutiny in both directions. Serious enough to deserve attention. Serious enough that it shouldn't be repeated as settled fact until someone with actual authority confirms it. Judge Ashley Cole, whose son Warren has already been connected to this case, issued a second public statement recently, and the tone is worth noting. Her first statement was long, detailed, and aimed at the public, laying out a specific timeline. This one is short and guarded. She said her family has decided not to continue speaking to the press, that the media isn't the right forum for further elaborating on the facts of that day. But she also said her family hasn't yet had the chance to speak directly with the Wansleys or Crump, and that they're willing to do exactly that, to share everything her family knows so the Wells family can find some measure of rest. Whether that shift reflects legal advice, exhaustion, or genuine concern for her family's safety isn't something we can know from here. But the move from public defense to a private offer of cooperation is itself worth sitting with. We've mentioned this before, but it keeps resurfacing. Elmore has described going to the house where the boys stayed the night before the trip to retrieve Nolan's car. One of the young men there initially told him he couldn't find Nolan's keys, despite searching. It was only after a phone call from someone else that the keys turned up, sitting where they'd apparently been the whole time. Elmore says that moment damaged his trust significantly. Now, let's talk about the asymmetry that's been building in the background of this entire case. Nolan's face and name have been everywhere, in the news, in public appeals for information. The young men who were with him have remained largely out of view, reportedly after deactivating their social media accounts before his body was even found. None of them have been charged with anything, and that asymmetry alone isn't evidence of wrongdoing. But it's the kind of visible imbalance that a lot of people covering this case have pointed to, and it's fair to notice it. Now, the most significant new piece of this update. Javon Williams, one of Nolan's close friends, sat down for an interview under his own name and walked through his own account of that afternoon. He didn't see Nolan that morning, only once he himself arrived, around 11 o'clock. He walked down to the boat and saw Nolan surrounded by a big group, greeting him warmly. They spent time together, just hanging out. Then, around 3:40 or 4 o'clock, a separate altercation broke out involving a different friend of his, not Nolan. Javon went to check on that friend and says he was away from the boat area for somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. When he came back, Nolan's boat and the group he'd been with were already gone. He noted there were actually 2 boats tied up near each other in that spot, which means he can't be entirely sure which boat Nolan had even been on to begin with. Here's the part that matters most. Javon was asked directly about the video that's circulated online, the one many people believe captures Nolan in an argument. He said he genuinely can't tell if it's Nolan in that recording. He said the voices sound too clear for how far away the camera appears to be, and he offered his own theory that the audio might actually be capturing the other altercation entirely, the one involving his other friend. He also said, plainly, that investigators have never contacted him, despite being physically present on the island that day and being one of Nolan's closest friends. He said he doesn't understand why that hasn't happened. He pushed back, visibly upset, against online narratives suggesting he was somehow responsible, or that his own words have been twisted into something sinister. He said if he'd been the last person alone with Nolan, Nolan would still be here today. Javon's interview matters beyond any single detail inside it. He's the first person actually present on that island, close to Nolan, and not part of the group that returned without him, willing to speak on the record under his own name. That distinction, between anonymous claims and a name attached to a statement, matters enormously in a case otherwise shaped by deleted accounts and secondhand retellings. And notice what his account doesn't do. He doesn't accuse anyone. He doesn't claim to know what happened after his own group left the boat area. What he offers is narrower and more useful, a first-hand account of what he actually witnessed, including a plausible alternative read on a piece of evidence a lot of public speculation has treated as more conclusive than it may be. Which makes it stranger that nobody official has gone and gotten that account directly from him. Now here's a detail that's genuinely confirmed, separate from any theory. One of Nolan's friends called the Coast Guard around 11 p.m. on July 4th. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office didn't formally request Coast Guard assistance until around noon the following day, more than 12 hours later. That gap doesn't, on its own, prove anyone was covering anything up. There are mundane explanations, the difference between an informal call and a formal request, jurisdictional handoffs, the ordinary pace of overnight operations in a rural county. But it's also exactly the kind of detail that fuels legitimate frustration for a family already struggling to trust this investigation's pace. Until the full picture of that initial call, what was said, who received it, why 13 hours passed, gets filled in, this stays one of the more legitimate open questions in this timeline, separate entirely from the unverified rumors circulating elsewhere. Not everyone examining this case agrees the pace is unusual. A CNN law enforcement analyst, a former police chief in both Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., who is black himself, has offered a more measured take. He says he understands completely why people are asking whether race played a role here, but in his professional experience, nothing about this timeline is actually unusual. Toxicology alone, he said, can take 2 to 3 weeks even in ordinary cases. What's unusual isn't the pace of the investigation. It's the scale of media attention around it. He also pushed back gently on one popular argument, that if Nolan had genuinely drowned, someone nearby surely would have noticed. Drowning, he noted, doesn't always look dramatic from a distance. It can be fast and quiet and easy to miss, even in a crowded area. That doesn't rule out foul play. It just means that argument carries less weight than it may feel like it does. This case has moved well past the family and their attorney. Protesters have gathered publicly in Ocean Springs, where Nolan graduated high school, demanding a transparent investigation. Among them, A local resident named Jerron Lowry, who'd employed Nolan in the past, spoke about his kindness, echoing almost exactly what his parents, coaches, and teammates have all said since this began. One protester put the moment into a wider frame, saying this gathering wasn't about vengeance or accusations, but about truth and transparency, and that families keep showing up because these stories tend to go unnoticed otherwise. She pointed to what she described as a long, painful pattern of young black men losing their lives under circumstances nobody fully explains. That's not a claim this investigation can confirm or resolve on its own. It's context for why so many people who never knew Nolan Wells personally are standing outside a courthouse for him anyway. It's worth drawing a clear line here, because this update mixes genuinely news-sourced information with real speculation, and it matters which is which. Confirmed and clearly sourced. The independent pathologist's identity and credentials, Judge Cole's second statement, the missing keys account, Javin's first-hand description, and the 12-hour Coast Guard gap. Still needing verification. Elmore's account of an adult on the boat. Pure theory, coming from commentators rather than investigators or witnesses, claims the body was moved, theories about tide timing, and questions about whether the boat malfunction was fabricated. Those are questions people are raising publicly, not conclusions anyone with actual authority has reached. So where does this actually leave things? A credentialed pathologist leading a second autopsy, results still described only as very soon. An unconfirmed claim about an adult's presence on that boat. A judge stepping back from public statements while offering direct cooperation for the first time. A close friend on the record, raising a real question about why investigators haven't called him. A confirmed 12-hour gap before Coast Guard assistance was formally requested. And a community well beyond this family demanding transparency. At the same time, a law enforcement analyst with real relevant experience saying nothing about this timeline is actually unusual once you set the media attention aside. Both things can be true together. A family can have entirely legitimate reasons for distrust, and an investigation can still be moving at a fairly ordinary procedural pace. That tension, more than any single new detail, is the actual story here. The official cause of death still hasn't been released from either side. Until it is, the legitimate questions and the speculation are both going to keep filling that silence. This case is not closed. When those results actually come, when Javin or anyone else who was there gets contacted by investigators, we will be here to cover it. If this is the kind of reporting you want, sourced, verified, nothing added for shock value, subscribe. We'll bring you the facts as we actually get them, and not a moment before. Nolan Wells deserved better than silence, and so does everyone still waiting on an answer.